everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session, which is one of the first sessions where we are sharing the progress from some of the teams that were formed during the matchmaking events that we've done. These were events when we're inviting academics on one side and researchers from the CGs from the other side, and creating some match and some new teams that were that started to work together. So the idea is to have a number of seminars where we will be able to learn about what the others are doing, sharing progress, sharing feedback about the different studies. And we hope that this also helps sort of forming a community where we are helping each other in this investigation. So now Mai Mahmoud from Tufts University will present and share the progress of their studies. Please, Mai, go ahead. And then we will have the discussion that comes after.
Great. Thank you, Rashid. Let me start by sharing my screen. All right.
Mina, can you remind us how much time we have for the presentation and then how much for the discussion?
Yes, Mai will present for about 45 minutes, and then Carly Trachtman from Empirical is here to do the discussion for about 15 minutes, and then for the last 30 minutes, we'll open the floor for questions and comments from all participants.
Okay, great. Please go ahead, Mai.
Thank you, Rashid, and thank you, SPIA, for inviting me to present at this webinar. Today, I'm presenting on my research, which is an ongoing research project titled Pricing and Allocative Efficiency of New Agricultural Technologies. I would like to acknowledge the generous funding from SPIA funding this research project, and also acknowledge the great support from my implementing partners, the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT. I owe them a lot for allowing me to use their new technology to actually do this research experiment. Starting with the motivation, in general, price subsidies can be an attractive policy tool for increasing take-up of new goods that have high expected benefits. This is quite common in several settings, including in public health and in agricultural production. And the main justification for a price subsidy in these settings is that the existence of market fraction would actually cause underconsumption or low levels of take-up, lower than optimal. However, on the other side, as we increase take-up through lowering prices or through introducing price subsidies, this might come at the expense of distorting allocative efficiency. And how this can happen in a setting where there is heterogeneity in marginal returns, where especially this is evident in agriculture production, where returns are heterogeneous across farmers. The higher take-up due to lower prices could increase take-up by farmers with lower marginal returns. So my main research question is to look at input subsidies and ask, do input subsidies induce take-up by lower return farmers? And why I need to look at this research question in agriculture setting, the interesting and unique characteristics of agriculture production is that farmers' returns are determined by several factors, including the farmer's management skills, the characteristics of the farm that the farmer is planting, soil characteristics, the location of the plot, and some factors such as land elevation and so on can affect the farmer's returns, in addition to also factors such as farmers' access to complementary inputs or access to markets and so on. And this is what distinguishes farmers based on their expected average returns. At the same time, for agriculture, there's also high levels of uncertainty. So farmers take time to experiment with a new technology and learn about their expected returns. And in my experiment in particular, using a new wheat seed, so this new technology can have productive and unproductive uses, meaning that as farmers take up the new technology, it does not necessarily mean that they are going to adapt this new technology in their agriculture to an agriculture production. They can take up the technology at the subsidized prices because the price is lower than the market price, and then do whatever they want with it. And we'll see from the results that this was actually happening in this example. So looking at the literature, my main contribution is to examine whether input subsidies distort allocative efficiency in agriculture. And this is a setting where price subsidies are widespread, but little is known about the allocative efficiency of the price subsidies. The debate on subsidizing goods with positive externalities is ongoing. Most of this debate comes from the literature on health policy. So, for example, a few studies found that price subsidies could correct for underconsumption in settings where the subsidy was on calorie tablet or immunization. But there are also other results that show that willingness to pay is associated with higher marginal benefits, suggesting that the higher willingness to pay is associated with higher marginal benefits, suggesting that prices have a selective ability. And this also comes from the health literature, as well as a couple of studies that were looking at agriculture setting. For example, the Libert et al. Paper was introducing an agricultural technique called lizard land leveling. And by eliciting farmers' willingness to pay, they find that the willingness to pay is increasing with marginal benefits. This is interesting. It's a little bit different from what I'm doing here because their new agriculture technique, usually farmers pay for the machinery and labor, and it's something that they pay for it and they get it. They exactly get the agriculture technique in return, where when we have price subsidy for an agriculture input, there is a room for waste because farmers can get the agriculture input and then waste it in different ways. The Beeman et al. Paper is also very similar to my paper in a sense that when I talk about the experimental design that I'm using in a two-stage experiment follows their experimental design. But on the other hand, they were looking at returns to capital, farmers' returns to capital and their self-selection into taking loans. Well, moving into the agriculture-specific literature, there is a scarce literature on evaluating agriculture input subsidies using randomized experiments. So Rashid and his co-authors were evaluating an agriculture subsidy program in sub-Saharan Africa, and they find that it has positive returns in terms of positive outcomes in terms of increasing productivity. But the difference between these settings and my setting is that these settings are actually are already targeted input subsidy programs, and they were targeting progressive farmers. What I'm looking at is that whether the subsidy level or the price level itself can have a targeting ability, and this is still quite ambiguous. So let me talk about the setting where I'm implementing this experiment and what is the agriculture technology that I'm using. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I collaborated with CIMMYT in order to use their improved seed variety for wheat, a new seed variety called Varigom 33. It was developed by CIMMYT in collaboration with local partners in Bangladesh. So it was actually tailored for the wheat cultivation in Bangladesh. This seed was first introduced recently in 2017 and is still at early levels of dissemination. So the market supply of Varigom 33 is a bit limited. And it was also introduced to be resistant to major crop disease. In particular, it was actually a rapid response to a new crop disease that recently appeared in Bangladesh called the wheat blast. So in this picture, I'm showing two wheat grains. One is the healthy green wheat grain on my right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, this is a wheat grain that is affected by the blast disease or wheat blast. And Barigam 33 is proven through agronomic trials to be resistant to this devastating crop disease. Part of the setting also that the implementation in Bangladesh is particularly interesting because Bangladesh is one of the great importers of wheat worldwide. It's the fifth largest importer of wheat, and the annual imports are in the range of 6 million tons a year. The wheat area, on the other hand, has been in continuous decline in Bangladesh, and this is due to several factors. One of them is a crop disease. Other factors that contribute to the decline in wheat areas, also climate change and the shorter winter season. So in this study, I am studying the effect of subsidies for Barigam 33, the new wheat seed, on the allocative efficiency and using a two-step experiment. And I will talk about the experimental design in a second. Maybe I can pause here. Is there any questions, or are we saving questions till the end? If there is a clarification question, I can take it now.
Questions are welcome.
All right.
Okay. Rashid, I don't know if you were saying something. We didn't hear you very well.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
saying
So,
questions are welcome. Questions are welcome during the presentation. Sorry.
okay, yeah. So
if
if
anyone has a
there
question, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, okay, great. So I'm happy to take clarification questions as I move on. But if there are no questions at the moment, I will start talking about the two-stage experiment. So this is a randomized controlled trial. It's implemented in two stages that are both implemented in the same agriculture season before farmers start planting wheat. The total sample size is 220 villages, and in each village, I did a village census to randomly select 25 farmers per village. So the initial sample or the targeted sample is 5,500 farmers overall. This sample, I split it into 3 treatment arms at the first stage. So the first treatment arm is the control villages. These are 40 villages. They receive no treatment, but they are surveyed at each round of the survey. The high subsidy villages, these are 60 villages, and they receive a subsidy that is of 100% subsidy, free distribution, and 50% subsidy. The reason that I did not introduce any subsidy level in between 100 and 50, so I was trying to introduce subsidy levels that would allow me to estimate the entire demand curve. The subsidy levels would go from 0 to 100%. But when I did the pilot before implementing the actual experiment, I found that the take-up is very high at any subsidy level above 50%. And by very high, I mean like 90% average take-up at the pilot survey, at the pilot study whenever we have a subsidy level that is 50% or above. So this is the high subsidy villages here receive only 100 or 50%. The medium and low subsidy villages, these are 120 villages. They either receive a medium subsidy level, which is a subsidy level that ranges between 25 to 40%, or a low subsidy village that ranges between 0 and 20%. And by 0%, I mean this is 0% subsidy, which is the farmers receive or they are offered to buy the seed at the official market price. So my subsidy levels are with reference to the official market price. I know that farmers get access to the seeds at different prices in secondary markets or black markets, but the subsidy is referring to a price discount relative to the official market price. So at stage 1, each farmer is offered a standard seed package of 15 kg of seeds, and the seed package size was determined based on the average plot size and the seeding rate for the seed variety. And from pilot survey, I found that the average plot size is in the range of 0.3 acres, and the seeding rate means that 15 kg of seeds is good enough for this plot size. And stage 1, this is the take it or leave it design. So farmers have the choice whether to take up the seed and pay the offer price, if the offer price is a positive price, or whether or not to take up the seed if it's a free distribution. There is near 100% take up whenever the price is free, or anything that is equal to a 50% discount on the market price. In the medium and low subsidy level, I find there is some buyers and some non-buyers. The farmers, I gave them a window of 3 to 5 days to decide whether they want to buy the seed at the offer price, so that if farmers are facing very short-term liquidity constraints, they can take some time to be able to secure the money needed to buy the seed package. And then after they take the decision in stage 1, I come back again within a 2-week period and what I call stage 2 treatment. The stage 2 treatment is randomizing villages in the medium and low subsidy villages into stage 2 treatment and stage 2 control. The treatment is to go back to the non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages and tell them, okay, we had a surplus in the seeds that we were using for this research study, and due to the surplus, we wanted to be fair, and we had a lottery of distributing the extra seeds to a random sample of farmers in these villages. So the non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages, they receive the seed for free after they make a decision not to buy the seed, and this was within 2 weeks after they decided not to buy the seed at the offer price. To be fair to the buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages, because I want to have the same treatment, or practically I cannot introduce different treatment for the different farmers within the same village. So the buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages, I tell them, okay, now because I have a surplus of seeds that I gave for free to the non-buyers, and because you have already paid for the seeds in stage 1, I'm giving you your money back. So it's like a reimbursement to the buyers in stage 2 treatment villages. So stage 2 treatment villages, the green box, so the boxes with the green font, these are the same villages, but they have the distinction between this part and this part is that the buyers in the stage 2 treatment receive reimbursement versus the non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment receive a free seed package that they have initially declined to buy the seed package. In the stage 2 control villages, I do not introduce any further treatment. So after I elicit the demand in at stage 1 and have a self-selected sample of buyers and non-buyers, in stage 2, the stage 2 control villages, they don't receive any further treatment. Any questions on the experimental design? Questions?
We have no questions in the chat so far, so I think you can continue.
Yeah, so this experimental design is crucial because this is actually the main randomization. So that I have two levels of randomization that I used in my empirical strategy. So the first stage randomization allows me to compare farmers who receive the seeds for free in stage 1 versus farmers in the control villages, and this will give me the returns to the average farmer or the average treatment effect. And because in stage 2, the treatment was also randomized, I look at the non-buyers in stage 2 treatment villages versus the non-buyers in stage 2 control villages. Essentially, these are farmers who choose not to buy the seeds at similar prices in stage 1, but and I randomly selected a subset of these non-buyers to be in the stage 2 treatment villages. So the difference between the returns to non-buyers in stage 2 treatment villages versus non-buyers in stage 2 control villages gives me the treatment effect for farmers who self-selected out of buying the seed. So they selected not to purchase the seed at the offer price, and the offer price was essentially at the same subsidy level for both of these groups. And the next step is to look at the empirical strategy. So the main goal of the empirical strategy is to test for positive selection. And I look at the outcomes of interest for farmer I and village J and strata S. I will talk about the stratification in a second. I compare the outcomes for farmers in the free distribution villages, so those who receive the seed for free at stage 1, versus the self-selected non-buyers in stage 2 treatment villages and the self-selected non-buyers in stage 2 control villages. And for completeness, I also look at the outcomes of the buyers in stage 2 treatment versus the outcomes of the buyers in stage 2 control villages. The omitted group here is the control villages, will be my omitted category. And I control for strata fixed effects because when I did the randomization of the treatment, I randomized on 2 things. First is the sub-district, because this sample covers 12 sub-districts in 7 different districts in Bangladesh. And the second stratification unit is also, I looked at wheat intensity at baseline. So because I have village census before starting the experiment, and part of the village census, I asked the farmer if they have ever planted wheat over the past 4 years. I have this wheat intensity, the intensity of farmers who grow wheat in the last 4 years in each village. By construction, I excluded from my experiment villages that have less than 10% of the farmers growing wheat on any of the past 3 to 4 years. And I found that there was a difference in the heterogeneity, a difference in the intensity of wheat cultivation. So I stratified my treatment randomization based on the wheat intensity, like the village level wheat intensity interacted with the sub-district. The important coefficients that I would like to focus on when I look at the results are gamma 1 and versus the difference between gamma 2 and gamma 3. The gamma 1, as I showed in the boxes where I was explaining the experimental design, is actually comparing farmers who were randomly selected to receive the seed for free at stage 1 without any selection. So this would capture the average treatment effect. It's a comparison between free distribution at stage 1 versus control group farmers. And the difference between gamma 2 and gamma 3, this is the other box that I had that measures the treatment effect for the non-buyers, those who selected to be self-selected to not to buy the seeds at stage 1. So when I test whether gamma 1 is equal to the difference between gamma 2 and gamma 3, this is essentially a test to see whether the self-selected non-buyers obtained similar, lower, or higher outcomes than the average farmer. And if I found that, for example, if my results had a gamma 1 that is greater than, or significantly greater than the difference between gamma 2 and gamma 3, this would imply that this is an evidence for positive selection, meaning that farmers who choose not to buy the seed and then received it for free are making lower returns than the average farmer in the population. And this could explain why they still selected out of buying the seed at stage 1, because they were expecting lower returns. And what we see is that after they receive the seed for free, they actually experience lower returns. Versus if my results show that there is a significant difference in the sense that gamma 1 is significantly lower than the difference between gamma 2 and gamma 3, this is the opposite. It's actually an evidence of negative selection, such that farmers who self-selected not to buy the seed end up making higher than average returns when they receive the seed for free. And an essential assumption for this test is that farmers would actually end up using the seed if they receive the seed for free in stage 2. And I will show you results that they do. So even the non-buyers who receive the seed for free in the second stage, they end up using the seed, although in the first stage they refuse to buy the seed, or they decline to pay the offer price and buy the seed. Continuing on this regression specification, I also include the self-selected sample of buyers, and I separate the buyers in the stage 2 treatment versus the stage 2 control for 2 reasons. First, if I compare the buyers in the stage 2 treatment to the farmers who received the seed for free in the free distribution villages, this is essentially a comparison between 2 groups who eventually received the seed for free. The difference is that the free distribution villages, it was free distribution from the first day, and for the buyers in stage 2 treatment, these are farmers who first paid the offer price and received the seed, and then they were reimbursed at stage 2. The difference between gamma 4 and gamma 5, this is a comparison between 2 groups of farmers who showed willingness to pay, who actually did pay similar prices for the seed at stage 1. And we'll see how similar or different their outcomes are. The main difference is that stage 2 treatment might alter the outcomes and through 2 channels. One of them could be because there is a higher intensity of treatment in the stage 2 treatment villages. More farmers are receiving the seed due to the free distribution in stage 2. And also another channel for a difference between gamma 4 and gamma 5 is that the stage 2 treatment in itself might alter farmers' behavior, farmers' expectations. So this is a testable hypothesis to see if there are any difference in the outcomes between these 2 groups of buyers. Maybe before jumping into the results, I can see if there are any questions at this stage.
There are a number of questions that are on the chat. If you want, I can read you the questions. The first one from Karen McCord. You will probably get to this later, but would be useful to know the percentage of buyers in medium and low subsidy villages.
Yeah, I will show you in 2 slides. I will show you a graph with the demand curve. So yeah, I have a slide for that.
And then also from Karen, are seeds amounts constant?
Yeah, it's the same. It's a standard seed package for so yeah, to make logistics easier, I had offered farmers only 1 seed package in a take it or leave it design. I've tried the pilot to offer the farmers the choice between buying 1 or 2 seed packages, but then this was introducing a lot of difficulties in logistics as an implementation. So the standardization of the treatment is that from the free distribution to the 0% subsidy, all the farmers are offered 1 standard seed package per farmer.
And another question from Michael Euler, do you think that the handing out for free the seeds could alter the economic management? And if that happens, then that may bias all outcomes.
There is a potential for stage 2 treatment, the treatment in itself alter farmers' behavior. And this is, as I said, it's a testable hypothesis because I have the outcomes of because of the stage 2 randomization, I can compare the outcomes of those in the stage 2 treatment and the stage 2 control. And I do that for the self-selected sample of buyers versus the self-selected sample of non-buyers.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
Then we'll gather questions for after this.
Okay, so yeah, let me show you a preview of the results and then go into the specifics of these results. So first, the first stage results show that demand is highly elastic. In one slide, I'll show you the downward sloping, the sharply downward sloping demand curve. But and surprisingly or interestingly, buyers at lower subsidies are not more likely to plant the distributed seeds. So the usage rate was flat and across buyers and different treatment arms. Also, I see that prices do not allocate the seed to the farmers who are most likely to plant them. And I will talk about this in details in a few slides. When I look at the impacts on farmers' returns measured in terms of revenues and profits, I don't find evidence that non-buyers are worse off than the average farmer. And for profits also, I don't find evidence of positive selection, and meaning that self-selected non-buyers were not making any lower profits than the farmers in the free distribution villages. So now looking at the demand curve, and I hope this would answer one of the questions in the chat, is that there is a highly elastic demand curve in contrast with a flat usage rate. So the share of purchasing farmers in stage 1 at the high subsidy villages, this is on average 90% of the treated farmers in the village would take up the seed. And this drops down to less than 40% or around 30% in the medium subsidy villages. For the low subsidy villages, this is very low in the range of, I remember, 6% or 46%. And in contrast to that, when you look at the share of farmers who took up the seed and ended up planting the seeds on their farms, so the share of farmers planting the seeds among the stage 1 buyers, this is not very different across the different treatment arms. I would have expected this graph to be somehow mirror image of the downward sloping demand curve, so that farmers who paid a higher price for receiving the seed at stage 1, I would expect them to be at least slightly or greatly more likely to end up planting the seed on their plot, but I don't find evidence of that there. The usage rate is on average 49% for the high and medium subsidy levels, and something like 44% for the low subsidy, so for the buyers in the low subsidy villages. To give you a closer look on the inverse demand, this is all the offer prices for the seed package. So in terms of price in TACA per kg, the price varies from the positive price varies from 20 to 40%. Of course, the free distribution was a zero price and the take-up was 100%. But this is the inverse demand curve, and it shows how as the offer price increases or the subsidy level decreases, less and less farmers in the treatment villages are willing to pay the offer price and purchase the seed package. Also, just to give you a quick look of what are the other usage of the seed, why do I see that less than 50% of the farmers on average end up planting the seed after taking it up, or actually after paying some price for the seed package? So the most common uses of the seeds is that the farmer can plant the seeds. The farmer can also pass the seed to another farmer, or the farmer can use the seed as food. And remember, this is a wheat seed. So some farmers actually ended up using it for food, whether it's using it as wheat flour in the end, or using it as animal food. And if I omit the high subsidy villages and have this the buyers in the high subsidy villages as my omitted group, And I compared them to the buyers in the medium and low subsidy villages, and let's exclude the stage 2 treatment for a bit. There is no difference, there is no significant difference between the likelihood of planting the seed for the buyers across the different treatment arms. And this is consistent with the flat usage rates that we see in the graph. And when I look at all the treatment villages, so I distinguish between the buyers in stage 2 treatment versus the non-buyers in stage 2 treatment that ended up receiving the seed for free at stage 2. Also, I don't find any significant difference in their likelihood of planting the seed on their plot versus the likelihood of a farmer in the high subsidy villages ending up planting the seeds on their plot. Any questions on this piece of results? And yeah, so what I conclude from this is that this piece of results for just the first stage results and using looking at take-up versus productive usage, as a first piece of evidence that subsidies do not distort allocation. Lowering the subsidy or increasing the subsidy, we end up with on average similar usage rate when we look at the productive usage of the seeds. Okay, so moving on to the second piece of results, and here I would look at the regression specification that I explained in the empirical strategy. I find that prices do not have a selection effect, meaning that when we look at the adaptation as an outcome, so the farmer adapting Varigom 33 seeds and planting it on their farms, and compare this across the different treatment arms of farmers in the free distribution villages versus the self-selected non-buyers, and distinguish between the randomization to stage 2 treatment versus stage 2 control. I find that being in a free distribution village increases the likelihood that a treated farmer would adapt Varigom 33 by Varigom 33 seed by 41 percentage points. And this is relative to the control villages mean of 0.15. As I mentioned, that this new seed variety is at early stages of dissemination. So part of the treatment is that it increases the supply of the new seed variety. But the interesting contrast, if you contrast this increase in the likelihood of adoption among the random sample of farmers in the free distribution villages versus the difference between the increase in adoption among the self-selected sample of farmers who choose not to pay the offer price and did not buy the seed at stage 1, I find that stage 2 treatment would result in an increase in adoption of actually 34 percentage points, the difference between 36 and 0.02, 0.36 and 0.02. This is only due to the random allocation to the stage 2 treatment that introduced the farmers to free distribution at stage 2. And this in itself is an interesting and actually astonishing result. If the farmers were choosing not to buy due to lower expected returns, I would not expect them to end up using the seed and to be as more or less equally likely to use the seed when they receive it for free to the random sample of farmers who received the seed for free from stage 1 without prior selection. And I did test for the difference between these coefficients. So and the p-value for this test is actually 0.18. I also look at the impact on growing wheat at the extensive and intensive margin. So whether the farmers ended up growing wheat at all, or they increased the share of wheat area among their farm plots. And I find similar trend of results is that the random sample farmers in the free distribution villages they increased their extensive and intensive margin of wheat cultivation. And this increase in wheat cultivation by the average farmer is not significantly different from the increase in wheat cultivation that is only due to stage 2 treatment among the selected sample of non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages. So when we compare the non-buyers in stage 2 treatment and stage 2 control, the difference between their outcomes versus the average treatment effect of the outcome for the farmers in the free distribution village, I don't find that these are significantly different from each other. There a question in the chat?
Yes, there are a number of questions which were essentially about before the results, about the puzzling results about what they do with the seeds. From Marich, the three are related. The one from Maréchal Buisson is about, is it possible that they keep the seed for the next cropping season? In that case, do you capture this use of the seeds? From Kilbrum, you have a question about, does that mean that farmers' demand for food is more elastic than for planting? And could that be because they have already planted for their plant or seedling when they received, when you gave it for free? Yes, and Michael Euler also, how were seeds advertised, promoted in the village, and related to the comment of Kilbrum, when relative to planting? Do you want to address these comments together to give us a bigger picture of what they have done with the seeds?
Okay, so let me start with the first question. If they save the seeds for the next agriculture season, we were keen on implementing this intervention and at a good timing before farmers have started their planting. So we allowed for enough time, and the enumerators actually went to the villages before farmers have started planting wheat or other winter season crops. Maybe farmers plan in advance. If they have already planned in advance, this could be the only drawback. But the timing was a good timing in terms that farmers have not started planting before the intervention. And when I mean before the intervention, I mean before the intervention of the 2 stages. So the 2 stages were implemented and a time that allows farmers to take the seeds and plant it before they have already started planting the winter season crops. Saving the seeds for another season, I don't think this is the rational choice, because farmers can plant the seeds and after harvest, they can save part of their harvest as a seed for the next agriculture season. So saving the seeds for the next agriculture season would not stop them from planting the seeds in this season, unless if they have strong reasons to believe that this seed variety first would survive for an entire year, and second, that it will be for some reason more productive if they use it 1 year later than planting it and reproducing the seed and then save part of their harvest as seeds for the next season. The elasticity of the demand for food, maybe this is something that I need to look into. How the seed was advertised, farmers received the seed package was a pamphlet that explains the features of this seed variety, and the key features is that it is resistant to wheat crop disease. It has a yield advantage of on average 5 to 8% higher yield compared to existing wheat seeds or existing seed varieties. And it also, I think it was fortified with zinc. So farmers have already received this information about the key features of the new seed variety. So if there are no other questions at this point, I will move to the next set of results. And this is to show that despite of the treatment, I actually find that farmers are moving away from cultivating wheat. And this is evident across Bangladesh, not only in my study area. But if I looked at my sample data and compare the share of the top crops for the winter season across all the sample plots, and do this comparison between the treatment and control groups, and also between baseline and follow-up, I see that the main crops that are competing with wheat are border rice, onion, and maize. And for these three crops, the trend is going upwards. So the farmers between baseline and follow-up, the share of their samples that were allocated to border rice, onion, or maize is increasing. And this is happening for both the treatment, the straight line, and the controls, the dashed line, the treatment and control groups. The only difference is that wheat is the trend is going downward. Farmers are decreasing the share of the sample of the plots in the sample that are allocated to wheat. So although we find positive impact on the extensive margin of wheat cultivation, this is due to this difference between the follow-up share of wheat samples across the treatment and the control group. But the overall trend for wheat cultivation is going downward. And I have also admin data at the national level that shows that this is actually taking place across all districts in Bangladesh, or across all wheat cultivating districts in Bangladesh. So I want to comment also not only on the extensive margin data, but on the farm level share of wheat area. So the data on the farm level of share of wheat area, if you remember from this table, the control village mean is 0.06, and the treatment at most increases this share of wheat area across the entire farm planted by the farmer. It was 9 percentage points. So this shows that wheat represents a relatively small share of the total farm area for each farmer. My intervention, as I mentioned, is one seed package for farmer of only 15 kg of seeds that is sufficient for an average plot. But it's not expected to have a stronger, significant impact at the farm level. And that's why when I was planning for this experiment, I designed a measure to allow me to look at plot level impacts. So while collecting data during the baseline surveys, I asked farmers to give me agriculture production data for 3 main plots. And my definition was for main plots was to the 3 main plots that are suitable for growing wheat. And I also asked the farmers to rank.
Just a quick, you will need to wrap up as soon as you can, because we are getting over the time that was allocated for the presentation.
Thank you, good to know. Yeah, so I asked them to rank these plots in terms of their suitability for growing wheat. And for the plot that they ranked as the most suitable plot for wheat cultivation, this is the plot that I use for the plot level analysis across all the treatment and the control arms. So just to give you a quick look at the difference in the extensive margin effects when I compare the outcomes for the top ranked plot in terms of wheat suitability versus the other wheat plots that were sampled, I find that there is the strongest effect for the top wheat plot across all treatment arms. And this is the wheat plots that this is the plot that I would focus on in the control and treatment arms, and doing the plot level analysis for impacts on revenues and profits. And yeah, just to end with the results on the impacts on plot level revenues and profits. As expected, revenues data is a little bit less noisy than profit data, because revenue is just total yield multiplied by output price for the total revenue for the plot, and profit is revenue after subtracting from it all the input costs. When I compare the outcomes of farmers in the free distribution villages versus the difference between non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment and stage 2 control, again, I don't find any evidence that the non-buyers were making any lower revenues. If anything, were actually making less negative revenues or less negative profits. And the statistical test for the difference between these two coefficients versus the coefficient on the free distribution villages is not statistically significant. And I also present the confidence interval for this difference between coefficients, and I can exclude any positive selection in terms of revenues or profits that is above 13 to 18%. I also controlled for some baseline controls using lasso selected control, so that I would allow for controlling for unbalanced baseline characteristics. So the key takeaway from these results on profits and revenues is that there is no evidence that the self-selected non-buyers are making lower than average returns. A potential explanation for the negative point estimates or the negative average treatment effects on revenues and profits, although this new technology was agronomically tested to have a yield advantage, and it does show a higher yield than existing wheat varieties, farmers are making a choice not only between different seed varieties, but also between different crops to grow in the same season. So despite of the yield advantage, I actually run a regression on the self-selected sample of, on the subsample of wheat-only plots. And after controlling for farmer fixed effects, the plots that were cultivating Varigom 33 showed to have higher wheat yield than the plots where the farmers were planting other seed varieties. And I did this test with and without farmer fixed effects. But the negative point estimate could be because the yield advantage of Varigom 33 maybe was not enough to close the revenue gap between wheat and substitute crops. And the last table I will show you, this summary statistics comparing revenues and profits for wheat versus the most common crops that were farmers grew around the same time of the year. And although comparing baseline to follow-up, there was an increase in wheat revenues on average across all wheat plots in my sample, the average revenue of a wheat plot is on the lower side compared to the average revenue of other crops such as borer rice or onion or maize. So these are my main findings, and I will just end with saying that this is still a work in progress. I would very much welcome your comments and suggestions on the way forward. We're still working on doing further analysis using machine learning techniques to test for treatment effect heterogeneity, and also the results I showed you were from the first round of follow-ups that happened at the end of the harvesting season after the implementation. There is a next round of follow-up that is planned for this spring at the end of the harvesting season of the following year. So in the following year, we did not introduce any further interventions, but I would still go back to the field and collect a next round of survey data. So thank you so much for listening, and sorry for staying over time.
Thank you very much, Mai. Kali, do you want to put your slides on for your comments? And meanwhile, I can read you some of the questions, some of these last questions. Which starts, there was a question from Mary Charlotte. How is suitability of plots for wheat cultivation defined? Is water access taken into account? Then from Karen, to what extent were the blast outbreaks in this year, which presumably matters for the returns to berry gum equal 33?
Yeah, these are very good questions. Thank you. So for the first question, I did not so I did not direct farmers in any way in their ranking. I just told the farmer, okay, give me if you're planting more than 3 plots, I want data on the 3 plots that you think would be most suitable for growing wheat. Like, assume if you wanted to grow wheat this season, give me the 3 plots that would be candidates for being the plot where you would grow wheat. And then among these 3 plots, I tell them, okay, so can you give me a ranking of which of these plots is the most suitable, or which one is the most likely plot where you would grow wheat on this plot? And I left it up to the farmer to interpret suitability for growing wheat from their own perspective, because the farmers are the ones making the choice which crops to grow on which plots. The blast outbreak, this is an excellent question. Thank you for reminding me. I should have mentioned that there was no blast outbreak during the interventions last year, and there, especially in my study area, there was hardly any reported cases of blast outbreak. But as I mentioned, this seed is expected to have a yield advantage even in the absence of a blast outbreak. The yield advantage would be more obvious if there was a blast for sure, but even the absence of a blast is still an improved seed variety for wheat. Thank you.
Kali, please go ahead with your presentation. You have up to 15 minutes.
Okay, great. I'll try to be less than that. Thank you so much, Mai, for a really interesting presentation. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed reading your draft a lot as well. So I won't spend a lot of time summarizing since you just presented, but essentially the idea is we have this question about agricultural subsidies. They may increase the uptake of improved varieties, but also, of course, distort prices. And if farmers with the highest willingness to pay for the technology are also those that benefit the most, then decreasing the price actually sort of leads to uptake by less productive farmers, which we might be worried about. And so we're looking at this improved wheat variety in Bangladesh and using sort of a creative 2-stage randomization procedure to first randomize subsidy receipt and then randomize additional free seeds to non-buyers or non-takers in the subsidy group. And then your main conclusion is sort of here that price does not have a selectivity effect. So just some brief highlights that I think are really worth noting about this work is that the research design is really clever. It's sort of similar to the Beeman et al. Credit study, as you mentioned, but sort of applying it to another setting that we think, subsidies are really important, and certainly fills a gap in the literature that way. And I think it's also really nice that you're able to sort of see these plot level decisions, which is, if they're sort of small changes over small areas, it can sometimes be hard to capture when you're just sort of asking farmers about their growing as a whole. So I just wanted to make sort of 3 main comments. The first one actually sort of relates nicely to the point that Karen was just asking about whether there was an outbreak. And so a lot of your conclusions are based on this fact that you look at differences in profits or differences in revenues and say, okay, there doesn't sort of look like there's this, ex post realization difference between the 2 groups of the farmers that were given it for free in the first stage versus in the second stage after not buying. But of course, remember that this is just the realization of outcomes in one state of the world, right? There's one sort of, blight, weather, everything that could possibly happen. And so we're sort of comparing these ex post outcomes when farmers are probably, making a different ex ante decision, potentially maximizing over, the expected utility or expectation of profits in different states of the world. So it's sort of maybe careful when you're making efficiency, allocative efficiency claims to really think about what the uncertainty means here, and whether you can really sort of infer off of like one season whether things were, allocated efficiently or not. Sort of going along with that, I'm wondering whether there are sort of information shocks between the seed purchase time and the planting time. So, farmers are choosing to buy the seed and then in some cases they're not planting it. I mean, I'm curious sort of why they would buy the seeds, even if, it's at a high subsidy. Maybe that's the cheapest way to feed their animals. I don't know. I would imagine there's probably cheaper ways, but I'm not sure. So that's maybe something to like really think about is, what are the information shocks and weather realization shocks that are happening at different parts of the production process. The second point, I think also sort of is related to some of the questions about take up in the low subsidy group. Of course, the reason that this comparison works is that you're looking at, these people that got it in stage 1 and free is sort of all the people that would and wouldn't have taken it up at a price. And then later you're sort of netting out those who did take it up at, the almost full price. But in practice, this is a pretty low percentage of farmers. I wasn't sure what the overall percentage was if you combined the medium and low subsidy groups, because I think there was more low subsidy than medium subsidy villages. But at least in the low subsidy group, it was only like 6%. So in practice, theoretically, it all checks out, but statistically, you might only be netting out like 6% of the farmers or, a very small percentage, which makes, these groups actually end up being very similar. And so therefore, it might be sort of hard to see any real differences in terms of the people who didn't buy in stage 1 versus when it was given for free. Additionally, you sort of note for a lot of the different outcomes that you can't reject that the treatment effect among those who got free seeds in stage 1 and the treatment effect for non-buyers that got free seeds in stage 2 are different. I'm wondering if there's any possibility this could be a power issue, just given there is like a qualitative trend of those coefficients being lower. So it might just sort of be good to think about what sample size you might need to detect sort of that difference, because in some sense you almost have the burden of proof going in the opposite direction of saying like you're trying to make a claim that these things are the same versus that they're different, which is sort of the opposite of the normal hypothesis test that we're often doing. Actually, I think you did this in the presentation. You did show specifications without some of the controls. So excellent. I would add those to your paper. Okay. And then the last point is sort of more about the interpretation of the results. And this is what you're getting into when you're looking at the different crops that farmers are growing. And so interestingly, sort of what we're thinking of as a good technology here, at least in this season, or at least in this realization of the state of the world, is not more profitable. And so in some sense, you could almost make an argument that the subsidy did still maybe decrease efficiency here, and in that there was almost a negative selectivity. So like if you offer this at full price, nobody is buying the technology, right? Now you're offering a full subsidy, everyone's buying it. Some people are planting it and sort of doing worse off. And so that sort of leads me to the question of, these season 1 adopters in the low or medium subsidy villages are, if anything, doing the worst. So who are they? Are these people that really just have no better outside options for acquiring seeds? And so maybe they can't grow rice or high value, onions, which are higher value crops for whatever reason. And, for some reason, maybe they can't leave their house or whatever it may be, that they have additional constraints. And so therefore you're sort of picking up this. And so in some sense, you're actually decreasing efficiency by giving people these seeds because they're, at least in this season, doing worse. So it's something to just, I think about a little bit more as you interpret the results. But that's really all I wanted to say. It's an excellent paper, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carly.
Thank you so much, Carly. Great set of comments. Super nice. So let's now open the floor to discussion from all the participants. I may even jump in and make some first comments if it's okay, while people are raising their hands to ask more questions. There are a number of points, and I think Carly is getting at this as well, and where I would like you to clarify what is it getting at exactly, because one thing is the concern that subsidies generate inefficiency, and in this case what we would compare is not exactly whether those who buy it at a certain price range are different, have different returns than those who buy it at a different price range, but it's a bit of the question of, are they using it even though the true returns that they get is lower than the price of these inputs? And we don't really have the answer to this question, which is if you want to know whether it generates inefficiency, that's the one you want to know, right? And then in all this question, I feel like theoretically there are a number of different concepts here. One is the difference between their expected returns and the true returns. And one of the motivations why we have this kind of subsidy is that we think that they may be underestimating the true returns. So there is a bit of this question, which one are you talking about exactly? You're thinking the true returns could be different. It would be correlated with what, and the selection is based on their expected returns. So how do you relate these two, and which one? And perhaps do you think that we are in a world where they don't know anything about it? And in fact, I wanted to state that in some cases, if those that select are the ones that have the expected returns that are lowest, and you can bring these ones in with more subsidy, it could be good because they may have the same true returns, but they're even more ignorant of it because they don't know this technology at all. And in some cases, you do want to bring these ones in. So it's good to clarify on this, but I think part of what you're saying is that there's some correlation between these two, and hence in that case, there could be some selection effect that's happening. But then there is another notion perhaps that's useful, is that you also say, you said it at the beginning, that they could have different returns also because of difference in skills. And I would say some of these skills may actually change over time, and they may learn how to use it. So then it becomes, it could be the case that it brings in people that have lower returns initially, but it's good because that allows them to go through this learning curve and then keep using it even when it's not subsidized. So again, it's in the sense that just you don't get much to the policy implications. I think that would be great because that would help understand why you're asking these questions. And I think depending on which one of these reasons is behind it, then the policy implications could be very different. And then I don't know if you're planning on getting something about whether they keep using it after it is subsidized, because that's a great revealed preference for actually, do they think that it is worth it even if it was not subsidized? And I think that is a good test for whether it was just an adoption while it is subsidized versus adoption believing that it is actually worth it even when it's not subsidized, which is part of the purpose of the subsidy. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Rajit, for these great comments. I'll definitely take these comments into consideration. Just to a brief follow-up comment on whether I would look at farmers continue using the seed after, well, when it's no longer subsidized. This is actually the main purpose of the second round of follow-up survey. So on the second round of follow-up, this is after harvesting in a season where the farmers did not receive any further intervention. So if you continue to see any treatment effect, this could be if both farmers have maybe the treatment at the first year have increased farmers' demand for the new seed, and now even when it's not subsidized, they would still look for this new seed in the market. Or remember that this is seeds are reproducible, so farmers can, if they have already planted the seeds on their plots in the first season, they can save part of their harvest for the following seasons if they are interested in continuing with this improved seed variety.
More questions?
I'm sorry, I just came in late. You might have explained the variety was selected, but it would be good if you could tell us how the wheat variety was selected, because just looking at the results, when it is not subsidized, when it's sold at market price, nobody adopts it. Which probably tells me that maybe the variety is not competent enough for the farmers. Even when it is subsidized, yes, farmers adopt it, but they don't really get higher yields or higher profit, which makes me suspect that maybe the choice of the variety was not done in a good way. I had another study that we did in Ethiopia, and the variety that we chose was not the best, but it had one important trait in terms of resist rust disease. When I shared this choice that we made, Karen had doubt that maybe this was best because you know, this is not the best variety available, and for taking this to farmers may not be a good idea. But indeed, it was a serious concern. But the breeders had confidence that this was actually the right, because if and when rust strikes, farmers almost totally losing their yields, and therefore, Rashid said, if you think about expected returns, then this variety would have higher expected returns. And indeed, what we found out is that many farmers really adopted it during our project and even afterwards. So can you just tell us how the variety was selected when
sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for these comments. So I mentioned this briefly at the introduction, and I'm happy to say that again, is that this new seed variety was implemented by the CGIAR Center CIMMYT, the Center for International Weight and Maize Research. So and they developed this new seed variety in collaboration with local partners in Bangladesh to make sure that is suitable for the agronomic conditions in Bangladesh. It was actually developed as a response to the outbreak or the first appearance of the wheat blast, the crop disease that I have talked about. So according to agronomic studies, this seed variety proves to be to outperform existing wheat seed varieties. But the issue is that farmers are making a choice across different crops as well as different seeds. And also when they make a choice whether or not to buy the seeds, remember that farmers, in many cases, they save seeds from previous seasons. Also, there's an informal seed sharing that is quite common in villages where farmers share seeds among their fellow farmers, not necessarily in a secondary market, but sometimes as a gift to their neighbors or their friends. They would give them part of their harvest to use it as seeds on their plots. This might partially explain the low take-up at the official market price, because it's not that farmers are necessarily buying seeds every season. Farmers do save seeds from previous seasons. They receive seeds as gifts or exchange seeds with fellow farmers. So if they have the choice between paying a full market price versus using a stored seed, it's not the choice between paying the market price for seed A versus seed B.
Thank you. And Niels, do you want to say your question, or do you want me to read it for you?
No, I can follow up because it's by pure serendipity. It follows up on what Mai just started off with, that actually the utilization of the new seed might also depend not on the competitive crops, but also on the existing seed in the farm. And depending on which seed farmers already had, that might have had an influence of whether they found the new seed attractive or not. Maybe you were also able to see that, and also depending on how far the new seed which was utilized actually replaced old seeds. Did they, on the plots, did they switch completely, or did they just try maybe 10%? And that would also maybe lead to a better understanding of farmers' process in adopting new seed, that it is not just either or, but maybe a learning. And so the simple season experiment might not yield the full results yet. Thanks. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Niels, for bringing this up. Yeah, so when I asked farmers about which crop they grow, and also for wheat crops specifically, I asked them about the type of seed variety that they used. So I find evidence that the treatment is partially crowding out existing seed varieties. So there is a positive treatment effect on the likelihood of adapting berry gum 33. And on the other hand side, I also find a negative treatment effect on the likelihood of using non-berry gums 33 seeds or the existing other wheat seeds. But also because I find an increase in wheat cultivation at the extensive margin, it's not just a replacement of berry gums 33 replacing existing wheat varieties, but also the subsidy and the intervention itself has increased the likelihood of farmers growing wheat. So the increase in adoption of berry gums 33 is greater than the decrease in the likelihood of using the other wheat seeds that were already existing. I hope this answers your question, Nelson. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions.
More questions? And just one or two, getting back to the how much the fact that you don't see differences in the returns, but that you don't have a strong first stage there in terms of usage. That's tricky, no? Because it means you cannot infer too much about whether they actually have different returns, but just if the first stage doesn't go through that much, then it is expected that you don't find much differences afterwards. So maybe is there a need to be more cautious in the statement that there is no selection in the returns?
I would like to correct this statement a bit. So in the first stage, I do not find strong first stage in the take-up in the low subsidy villages. So remember, the stage 2 treatment was implemented in the low and as well as the medium subsidy levels. And maybe next time I should show you this in the robustness check. I can look separately at the medium subsidy villages where there was more heterogeneity in the take-up. So there was higher first stage of take-up. But also I distinguish between take-up and usage because the stage 2 treatment increased, actually randomly induced higher take-up by introducing free distribution at stage 2. And as a result of the stage 2 treatment, I find a boost in the likelihood of adoption. So in terms of the first stage results and for adoption, I do have strong first stage results for adoption. And this is particularly so for the stage 2 treatment. And the downward sloping demand curve and the very low take-up and at the low subsidy villages, this is an interesting exercise, and perhaps I should include both in the paper and the presentation, is that I can exclude the low subsidy or focus more on the medium subsidy villages and distinguish between the self-selection results when I focus on the medium subsidy villages where there was more take-up at the first stage.
It sounds like a worthwhile exercise, I agree.
Just to add to that, I think one thing is that like both the stage 1 and the stage 2 treatments had strong first stages, if you will, but they didn't have differential first stages, I guess, in that there was no difference in the effects in that first stage between the stage 1 and stage 2 treatment. So I think that's kind of the first result.
Yeah,
but the stage itself was sufficiently strong with the stage 1 randomization and the stage 2 randomization. It was like 0.35 or whatever versus 0.4. There's just no sort of difference, but I don't think the design needs that.
Yeah, maybe I can go back to the slides for a second and distinguish. I think so when we look at when we say first stage results, I know people are still puzzled with the sharply downward sloping demand curves. This looks at the take-up, but I also, what I mean by first stage is that I look at adaptation as a first stage to the results on the returns. So I do have strong first stage impact on adaptation, but there is, yeah, as Kyle mentioned, the differential between the impact on adaptation among the free distribution villages versus the non-buyers in the stage 2 treatment villages, this is not significantly different.
Okay, I think that part's fine. So it's in the few minutes, I wanted to get back a little bit to this key, because it feels to me like it's slightly introduced as a question about, is the subsidy making people who should not buy, basically, which is one of the main concerns about subsidies. But then the answer that is, the question that is being answered is a slightly different one. Is the subsidy making people who buy different as it goes lower? But that, and when you compare even the difference between these two, and also these are averages in two groups, it doesn't tell you the whole distribution of returns, and in this distribution of returns, how much are sort of below zero in true returns that they get from the subsidy. So it does feel like a little bit of a mismatch between the initial research question and what is actually what you are able to answer with this question. Do you see, how do you reconcile these two better?
Yeah, so the way that I see the results is that I would expect farmers who made a decision not to buy the seeds at the offer price and then end up using the seeds when they receive it for free, that this is the free distribution at the second stage. This is the impact of 100% subsidy. And the 100% subsidy increased the take-up and eventually also increased usage by farmers who initially decided not to pay a positive price for the seed. If these farmers were making a purchase decision based on expecting lower returns from the seed, then a subsidy that increases take-up and usage by these low return farmers would distort allocative efficiency. What I find is that these farmers, their average returns are not different from the average returns of an average farmer in the population. And this gives me evidence that, or does not show evidence that the subsidy is distorting the allocation to farmers with on average lower returns than the average farmer in the population.
I get this point, but what I mean is, it is one thing to say, once you include more farmers, the average returns is not different from the farmers that you get with a lower level of subsidy. It's a different thing to say there is a misallocation comes if there are people who are buying the subsidy, the input, because it is subsidized, but if it at the market price, it is not profitable for them. At least that's how I would interpret the initial misallocation. And at the end, it doesn't seem like your data allow you to answer this question about what is the fraction of farmer. Either it could be that even in the first group that received the subsidy, there are some people that buy it even though they should not buy it, because they buy it because it's subsidized, but it's not profitable for them, at least at market price at the end. And there could be some of these in the second group. Maybe your statement is, it seems like the proportion of these two would be the same, those that buy it even though they should not buy it at market price. But it sounds, at least from your introduction, it sounds like this is the question: who is buying even though they should not buy at market price? And then the answer that you're giving now again is a different question. Is it a different selection for different levels of subsidy? Do you see?
Oh, I don't know, but like this sort of machine learning in the future and being able to sort of characterize the distribution of returns may be a good, like, sort of way to reconcile these two things that you guys are talking about. Because one thing planned in the future is to look at the distribution of returns using sort of machine learning, and look at the overall heterogeneity in returns and sort of see, are there some people, 10%, the top 10% or the top 20% who have positive returns, or, who are these people who have negative returns? And the idea is to use the free distribution arm to characterize returns as a function of X, and then you can port that back to again, this is just 1 year along Carly's point, it's returns for 1 year. Port that back to the choices to buy and adopt in the first stage and see who are these people who are buying? Is there what share of them are the people who look like, based on characteristics X, they have, either negative or positive returns. And that moves away.
Suggesting you have a strong
averages.
enough.
Because your point is that averages tell you something, but you want to know about the whole distribution, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Distribution and this criteria of what share of it falls actually has, or at least the predicted returns that falls below zero in terms of subsidized return versus market return.
Yeah, right. So predicting average returns based on or conditional on baseline characteristics, I think that this would be interesting, and as well as having a second round of follow-up so that it's not only impacts based on one point of time, but looking at two rounds of follow-up and reconciling the outcomes for these two rounds of follow-up would be interesting. I see that
let me read the last questions if you want, and then with this you can quickly answer this and we wrap up, because it's 6 on my side. It's time to end. To build a bit on what Niels was asking, in your data, can you observe partial adoption or planting? It is whether the farmer plants some but not all of the seed, or is it just 0-1 a dummy?
Interesting. Yes. And very few cases, because as I mentioned, the seed package is not a huge seed package. It's just enough for an average plot. So we do have a few cases where the farmers actually leave a comment at the end of the survey and say, we planted part of the season, the rest we used it as food, or we split the seed package between the treated farmer and another farmer. And we have the other case also happening, is that a treated farmer receives the standard seed package, and then they talk to other treated farmers and get more seed packages to plant bigger amount of the improved seed on their plots, especially those farmers who have larger than average plots. So planting versus not planting, it doesn't have to be planting the whole seed package. It's just if they ended up using the distributed seeds for any productive usage of planting the seeds versus not using it for planting at all.
Thank you so much. We need to wrap up with people need to get back to their other obligations. Let me congratulate you on the rapid progress that you've made since the matchmaking event, together with all the team, and the very nice paper that seems to be coming out of it. Congratulations, and thank you very much to you and to everyone for being at this seminar.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks to SPIA, and thank you, the audience, for listening to this presentation. I'm very much welcome comments via email, or I'm happy to chat with anyone bilaterally to follow up on that.
And many thanks to Carly for taking the time to answer, to give comments, and very insightful comments and super relevant. Thank you, everyone.